Welcome to Tamarindo Podcast, hosted by me, Brenda Gonzalez, a fitness coach, political nerd, and nonprofit capacity builder.
And me, Delsy Sandoval, a Guatemalan-American licensed therapist and passionate creativity advocate. Together, we're here to uplift our community through powerful conversations with changemakers, creatives, and healers.
Each week on the pod, we talk politics, culture, and personal development. Listeners call Tamarindo the Advocacy and Self-Love Podcast. Vámonos! Let's start the show. Hello, Tamarindo Podcast listeners. It's so great to be in the flesh with our guest here. Hi, Delsy.
Hi, nice to see you, Brenda.
So today's really special because we have Yvette Borjas, who is the creator of Radio Cachimbona here. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. Brenda, I think the last time I saw you was 2017 at the Latinx Podcast
Oh my
Radio
gosh,
Fest.
yes, baby podcast. The history there is that in 2016, there was a bunch of podcasts that started, including Cerebronas, right? Mm-hmm. This was your original baby podcast. Mm-hmm. So many podcasts started from that year after Trump, right? We know, like, I believe that that's the connection. So many, and a few of us survived, and here we are.
Congratulations. It's no easy feat coming from people who are doing this, and I know that you've continued. It's not an easy thing, so we should celebrate.
Yes, matracas to all of us. Okay, so you're joining us for the entire podcast. Mm-hmm. So what we always do is we start off by sharing what we call our que pasa. So this could be whatever you're up to, what's on your mind, what you've been thinking, very broad, whatever. And actually, Delsy, why don't you start? What is your que pasa?
So lately, actually, interestingly enough, because you're originally from the Bay Area, I went to the Bay this weekend, and it had been almost maybe like 5 years since I had gone up there, and I went to visit friends, and I went to kind of look around, and it was interesting because I had gotten a lot of information from people telling me like, oh no, don't go up there, things have changed, things are different, and I know better at this point in my life to know that you have to see for yourself. Mm-hmm. And I went up there, and it was just as beautiful as I remember, redwood forests and beaches and in gorgeous spaces, and really cool to kind of see all of the businesses that have popped up in the past 5 years.
What part of the Bay Area did you go to?
Oakland.
Yeah. Okay. Well, try San Francisco.
Yeah, I did spend some time in San Francisco, and I also enjoyed my time there. Actually, it was a very alive kind of experience. Yeah, in a way that I hadn't seen California in some time.
Very cool. All right. Did you experience the Bay Area summer? Was it cold?
It was a little cold. Yeah, yes. It was a little cold. And I went to Alcatraz for the first time, and it was really cold up there. And you know why I've never been to Alcatraz? Because I am the worst at preparing things, and so usually when I get there, it's all gone. Yeah. But it was nice to be a tourist in a state that I'm from, yes, and get an understanding of what people experience when they come here and what they see. So it was nice to have kind of a break, and experience your kind of home area.
I'm glad you think it hasn't changed that much, because I think it's changed a lot.
You spent time there, right?
Yeah, no, but I think that's such a good point, though. The nature remains the same. The nature was always the best part. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what is your que pasa? What have you been up to?
I think my que pasa is that yesterday I went to the Dodgers game for the first time, and it was Salvadoran Heritage Night. And I'm adjusting to LA, just moved, but one of the things I'm loving here is the really strong and vibrant Salvadoran community. I've never experienced that in any other city that I've lived in. Like, Tucson is very Latinx, but it's mostly Mexican American, Chicano, Chicanx. And I'm just loving being around my culture, my gente. I want to get a Dodgers. I'm from the Bay Area. This is sacrilegious, I know, but I'm I want that really cute Dodgers Salvi jersey. I want to buy it.
Yes. You're converted. I have my Guatemalan Heritage Night ticket ready.
God, I like y'all's. Y'all's jersey is cuter. I'm my grandma was born in Guatemala.
It's Tuesday. Vamos.
I love this. Okay, so my que pasa, I have a really funny story. That's what I decided to share with you all, is my que pasa is literally an anecdote. So this morning I got up really, really early, and I decided to I like to walk my dog to inspirational places versus just my neighborhood. So it was very early, so I was like, okay, I'll just drive. So I drove to South Pasadena. That's one of our places to go. We like to pretend that we live there. And got my little cafecito, walk, listen to podcasts, do what I do. And then I hopped on the metro and I went home, and that's when I realized that I freaking left my car in South Pasadena. That's how distracted I was.
No.
So, but I had another podcast recording to get to, so I had to like basically take the metro back later, just like a total waste of time. But that is how distracted I can be, that I literally lost my car.
Oh my God, I feel so seen, because that's a
something you would do?
Delssyism. That's something that I would do. And you know what? There was a purpose to spend more time kind of frequenting and seeing the city. So
Yes, I guess that's the lesson there. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, that was our Que Pasa. So you have now done Tamarindo Que Pasa.
Yeah.
So now we're gonna do the interview. Now we're gonna interview you. So we're gonna take a short break, and then we'll get right into chatting with you.
Sounds good.
All right, so there'll be some music after this. Okay, so now we're back, and I will start. All right, so we are back from our break. And Yvette, I know we know you, but our listeners that may not be familiar with you, I would love to hear it in your own words. What do you do, and what is your personal why? And also, what brings you to Los Angeles? You're a brand new Angelino, as we alluded to.
Yes. So I am a writer, a podcaster, and a movement lawyer. As a movement lawyer, I'm somebody who accompanies social movements and tries to bring legal strategies and interventions to support whatever that social movement's goal is. So we're going to get into it a little bit more, but this past year I was working with Endelon and with the National TPS Alliance. So I was hosting these legal clinics, trying to get people to fly on travel authorization or parole, because that would be a mechanism for TPS holders who first enter the country to get green cards. And I would say that my personal why definitely is something that starts with my parents. My parents came to the country in the 80s. They were fleeing the Civil War. They applied for asylum once they knew that that was an option here. And they became citizens. And I was the first in my family to graduate from college. I went to Yale and Stanford. And I think in a lot of ways, people might read my story and think, oh, the American dream is alive and well. Like, things are so great in this country. And my personal why is sort of like taking the privilege that I have found and paying it forward. So towards the people who I very well could have been in their position if, like, my parents had not gotten asylum. It was because my parents happened to settle in the Bay Area, where, asylum judges there have like an 80% grant rate. That was a big reason why, which is luck, essentially geography and luck. And I wanted to use my story as a platform to highlight actually the very real injustices that our border and immigration system creates. And I think that's how I ended up where I'm at now, why I moved to LA, which is to be a teaching fellow at UCLA Law in their critical race studies program. And I'm going to be teaching Latinx people in the law next semester.
Amazing. I love it. I would love to take your class.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for being just so comfortable telling us about your origin story. My family is also here for the same reason during the same Civil War, and also obtained asylum during the same time. So I feel kinship with you.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know more. And for our audience, you mentioned your work with Endelon. I'd love to hear what that work, tell us a little bit more about it, and also just what that experience has been like for you in navigating that landscape.
Yeah, so the National TPS Alliance is a group that started in 2017. They're a campaign of Endelon's, and they actually they self-organized out of necessity when Trump made the shithole countries comment and tried to rescind TPS for El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Haiti, and Sudan. And these were folks who at that point had been in the US for 2 decades and faced the very real possibility of suddenly being deported and separated from their US citizen children. And so they came together, and lawyers supported them, and they filed a lawsuit to stop Trump from doing that. And then in the process of doing that, like this group of people who had been a little bit apolitical before then, you know, like you probably haven't heard of temporary protected status holders, even though they hold a status very similar to DACA. And that's because they didn't put themselves in the forefront in the way that documented people did. But it's kind of funny. I don't think Trump expected this to happen, but his words, calling the countries where we're from shithole countries, and trying to expel people who were like, actually, I'm a community member here. I have a family. I have a church here. I've like paved these roads. Actually, I do belong here. And so it prompted this larger movement to try and get green cards for TPS holders. So previously, this was something that documented people were talking about, but now the TPS Alliance, like, insisted basically like we need to be included in this too. And they introduced legislation that would give both DACA-mented people and TPS holders green cards. And I entered into that at the end of the lawsuit. Towards the end of the lawsuit, Biden had already become president and he had already rescinded Trump's policies, so there wasn't really anything for the court to do. And we were in this period a year before the election. We were like trying to plan for the worst case scenario. Like if Trump won, how would we have wanted to prepare ourselves a year in advance? And what we came up with was creating these legal clinics, encouraging people to travel on parole. Because actually previously, TPS holders most lawyers would have encouraged them to not leave, because there's technically not a guarantee that you can come back. But in 2021, the Supreme Court made this ruling that made it harder for TPS holders to get green cards. They said that TPS didn't count as a legal admission, which is what's required for a green card. And then immigration lawyers looked at the law and they were like, oh, well, if you leave on travel authorization and come back, that's a legal admission, and that would cure their problem. And taking a step back, I would say that that's sort of what I try and do as a movement lawyer too. Like, I'm trying to make the law work for the people. And so it was about like finding this one little thing that actually could change a lot of people's lives, because if they didn't have this legal admission, they would need to if they didn't have this legal admission, they wouldn't be eligible at all to get a green card. And so if we encourage people to travel and come back and then apply for their green card before Trump got into office, we could, at least those people would be safe from deportation. And so that was how I got into that work, and I just loved being in that space because the TPS Alliance is a very Central American heavy organizing space, and that was like where my Spanish improved dramatically, because I had to learn how to speak Caliche and like Salvadoran Spanish with my coworkers. And so that's why there's Spanish content now on the podcast.
Yes,
Which we loved.
I wonder, Brenda, if we can take a moment to just kind of talk a little bit more for folks that are listening and maybe aren't aware of temporary protective status, maybe some of the countries that fall under this designation, and maybe some of the challenges that come with this designation, such as the constant applications and so on.
Yeah, oh my God, that's really important. So there's like 13 TPS countries, and there are a lot of countries in Latin America and Africa, actually. And honestly, I can tell you like how it is on the books and how I feel like it really operates. Like on the books, it's just supposed to be a way for the president to give temporary protected status to a country that's undergone a natural disaster or some other type of like civil war disturbance. So like for example, that's Hurricane Mitch that happened in 2001. So the reason I said, okay, that's what it is on paper, then this is what it really is because I feel like if you notice, these are actually a lot of countries where a lot of asylum seekers come from. And I think about it as sort of like the safety valve and bucket for people who get denied asylum, but are still coming from these countries where they're having trouble surviving. And it's unfortunate because like with asylum, you are in a pathway to get a green card and then eventually a citizenship. And like that's a game, our families, we've seen that's like a game changer. But if you are in temporary protected status, it's an 18-month period where the government promises not to deport you. You get a work permit, which that is a game changer too. Like people who have TPS have a lot greater socioeconomic mobility than people who don't have that work permit. But still, it's a precarious status. It's something that where you're not sure if it's going to be approved by the next presidential administration. Wow. And so you just submit your application and you hope that the next president will renew it. But you're living in this limbo. And that was one of my favorite slogans of the TPS Alliance is they have these shirts with like Central American birds on it, and it says our lives aren't temporary. Because it's like, and it sort of gets at why both like the documented population and TPS holders really should have legal status. Like they've just built their whole lives here already, you know, like they're American at this point. And so that was why it was such an upheaval, the thought of them being deported, because they had constructed lives here for like over 20 years.
Yeah, including businesses.
Yes.
And contributed to the economic values of the area.
It makes me think of Plyler v. Dell, right? Because like that's the whole damn reason. Like look at the logic back
did you go to law school?
No, but I did love my constitutional law class. So yeah, I really love the connection between TPS holders and being documented. These are very similar situations, precarious situations that yet there's so much promise and hope, and you can do a lot if you've been in the country for a couple of decades. But how unfair and how anxiety provoking, how disturbing it is to live your life like a temporary life, right? This you got to pass on life, and then maybe you get to go again. Who knows? So there's a lot to be desired for in terms of immigration policy, as we know. And in speaking about that, I mean, I know that right now we're of course in another presidential election. You talked about how things turned out back when it was again Biden and Trump, and Biden got elected, and so was able to reverse some of these harmful policies. But there still hasn't been the sort of transformation and the progress that we want in terms of immigration. But right now, okay, unfortunately we have Trump again, but it's no longer Biden, we have Harris, and we are just coming off of the Democratic National Convention. What have you been hearing the Harris campaign say about immigration? What do you want them to say instead? And you know, what do we want to happen?
So from Harris, we've been seeing a doubling down on the border militarization and security enforcement as their main focus in the immigration policy world. And there's so much that she could do, even though temporary protected status is something that isn't permanent. It's like a kind of a weak legal protection. They could redesignate it for all the Central American countries that I mentioned, so the way TPS works is like you have to have entered the country before a certain period of time. So for El Salvador, it's 2001. So there's a ton of Salvadorans that have come here since 2001. They don't get TPS. So if she like created a new designation date and said we're redesignating TPS for El Salvador, there'd be a ton more people that would be able to get work permits. And that's something she can do like unilaterally as president. She doesn't even need Congress to do that. I want her to talk more about immigrant inclusion instead of immigration enforcement. Like what you just mentioned with Plyler v. Doe. So that was like the case where the court said that it's illegal for a state to try and keep undocumented children out of K through 12 public schools. And the big reason why was because they were like, well, we don't know where these kids are going to end up, and like they very well could end up staying in the United States throughout their whole
what's the point
adult
of having
life.
this population of uneducated kids?
Like
the logic is very much there.
Yeah.
Follow the logic.
Yeah, like why would we create an underclass that is uneducated and that hasn't had access to our public education system if they might stay here? And that's a reality because there's 11 million undocumented people, like even under Trump and Biden and Obama, who deported a lot more people than previously. It's still just a small fraction of the number of people who are here. So just as a practical reality, like we're not going to be able to deport everybody who's undocumented. And so then the question becomes, what do we do then with this population? Do we help include them in our civic society, or do we exclude them? And I think the Democrats have focused too much on border security and enforcement, ramping up ICE and Border Patrol when there's so many other things they could be doing, like making tuition free for undocumented students, like allowing, widening the number of government benefits that immigrants can receive. There's a whole list of things that they could be doing, and I wish that that was where they were going instead of trying to assuage some like imaginary middle voter who they think wants tighter border controls.
Yeah, or an imaginary crisis. Like there really isn't this sort of need for border security in the way that with rhetoric, right? That doesn't match the crisis. That's actually the crisis that's there is from our border policy.
Yeah,
that's the crisis.
Exactly.
Talk about that crisis.
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree with you. I think that is what needs to be talked about. We were talking about how many asylum seekers need to wait on the Mexican side of the border to come to access their legal right to apply to asylum, and that's something that is a government created policy. Like the US has the resources, it always has, to accept large numbers of immigrants, and Trump used COVID-19 as an excuse to largely close the border, and Biden has sort of followed suit through different mechanisms, but still making it really hard to apply for asylum and making people wait on the Mexican side of the border. And so it's like I see, I don't know. No, I was about to like make an excuse for mainstream media, but I don't want to do that because I think like you go there and maybe if you don't have the background and history, you might think, oh, this really is a border crisis, but that's a short-sighted view that doesn't look at how we got here.
Right, absolutely.
Agreed. And I think that middle voter that you're talking about also may not have that understanding of the amount of economic support that this population of people have, given that they do pay taxes and they are doing these things. I think that the idea here is, are we giving benefits to those who don't contribute to the benefits? But actually that's not the case, and maybe that level of information gap is something that we could do better at as people who are in media in general.
And then maybe, I know you weren't wanting to give an excuse, but perhaps just like one of the excuses could be that like we don't have the time, we the Democrats don't have the time to fill that education gap, so we gotta speak their language, which is border security. I'm a tough lady, vote for me. And that's these are our options, unfortunately. But on to some lighter things.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit more and connect with you, kind of changing to a little bit more of a joyful conversation, in that the three of us have a lot in common, in that we've been able to kind of build these communities and these platforms from scratch as podcasters. And you were recently able to interview Prisca, and I want to say...
speak about the book, sorry. You didn't interview her, right?
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'll say it again.
Yes.
And I want to make sure I'm saying the name correctly, porque...
Oh, yes.
Out of respect. Okay. One more time. And you were recently able to interview Prisca Dorcas Mojica Rodriguez regarding her new book, which is titled Tías and Primas. We all read this book. I'd love to talk about it. What were your impressions? What did you get from the conversation?
So I loved her book. I think the thing that I really appreciate about Prisca's voice is that she's always speaking to Latinas and to like children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. And I think it's just really refreshing, especially, coming from like a more journalistic, like podcaster background, where I'm hearing a lot of people like try and pretend that they're objective. I just really appreciate that she comes out and she's like, I'm not objective, and this is where I'm coming from, and this is who I'm speaking to. And she just like helped me, re-understand my childhood a little bit, certain relationships to certain tías and primas, and helped me see a little bit of all of the tías and primas in myself too.
Right.
We talked about how it was like I did an Instagram live with her too, and we talked about how it was really different from her first book, which actually was kind of more first person, focused on her perspective, to this, which was more prescriptive and normative. She was like, this is who the tías and primas are, which I liked that she felt so comfortable kind of taking on an authoritative voice. Like, I'm not just talking about my perspective, because that this is my truth and you can't really combat it. But I appreciate that she was like, oh, I also have this other like prescriptive stuff to share, too.
Yeah. I really like what you said there about how it gave you an understanding of your role. Because I think one of the things that's interesting about reading this book is that you're reading it from the perspective of a child at first, right? Like you're kind of, you put yourself back in that place, especially when she's talking about like the cool tia. I forget, I get the young tia, I think was the title. Thinking of it from the perspective of a young person, and then kind of forgetting that you exist within those systems and those narratives as an adult reading the book. And I think after a while you're able to get that perspective, which is really, really fascinating. And I also want to say that the balance that you're talking about, even though it was a strong stance, she was able to hold a lot of truths at the same time.
And also to be gentle and kind. You know, like that's what I love about Prisca, is that, when, you know, a lot of people say, I'm an unapologetic Latina. Like, she really does. She is that. Like, that's who I think of when when that phrase is thrown around.
Totally.
But at the same time, she's also very tender and very kind. And that's what I really enjoyed about how each chapter of the book sort of ends with a love letter to this tia. Even the tias that we may not have liked, or the primas that we didn't understand, she's able to kind of step back and say, okay, here's my love letter to you. Here's what I want you to take from this. Here's like, I like that. I think there's like she really is the, you know, the sharp edges but tender.
Yes, that was her first
there
title.
was so much there around like empathy building for some of these tias or primas that maybe you might have been a little envious of, or that you might have kind of existed in competition with. There was a lot of empathy that came for that kind of role in the family life. And I'm curious for you, if podcasting in general has been kind of an avenue for that for you, for expanding your understanding of the people that exist in these roles in our culture.
I think so, for sure. You know, part of the reason why I call my podcast Radio Cachimbona, which is Salvadoran slang for badass woman, is that I interview like mostly women on my podcast. And I think that my guests have definitely made me realize like Latinidad is multifaceted. And that's something that Prisca does too, as well. Like, she's a baddie, she's an academic, she's a public intellectual, she's all of those things at the same time. And I think that's why like she inspires me, and I consider her a personal friend, because that's the type of complexity that I want to embody too.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay, so I think we can end this section of the interview and now go to our closing. So what we do at the end of all of our podcast episodes is that we like to do our matraca, something we're celebrating, something that goes in la basura, that you're canceling, you're done with, you're over. And then an inspiración, so it could be like a book you're reading, or a piece of art that you're appreciating, or a show that you're enjoying, whatever comes to mind. And let's start with you, Yvette. We'll do matracas all around. We'll do that first. So what is one thing you're celebrating this week?
One thing I'm celebrating this week is, I think, my new job and settling into the faculty. I like still feel uncomfortable saying faculty. Like, is this real? You know, settling in, getting comfortable. And we, like, one of the big parts of my role is going to these faculty workshops to comment on their upcoming papers. And I forced myself to ask a question at the first one that I went to, just because, I just wanted to like start off that part of my life on a strong note. So I'm celebrating that I like pushed myself to do that. I would say in the basura, I mean, I'm not going to be able to actually throw this out, but LA traffic.
Yes, I mean, I think everybody agrees with that. And the commute from the east side to the west side is terrible.
It is. And I think my inspiración this week is participatory defense. It's an organizing model, and Raj Jayadev recently published a book about it, sharing all these stories of how like ordinary working families interrupted criminalization and interrupted deportations, and they kept their people home. And as a lawyer, it's super inspiring, because I think when you go to law school and you enter practice, often, unfortunately, like you could be blinded by thinking that lawyers are the solution and that lawyers must lead the way. And participatory defense is just reminding me that actually like the power's in families and organized communities, and we like don't need more lawyers to make the legal system more just. Like we just need more ordinary people paying attention to what's happening.
Yes, I love that.
All right, you want to do all three for
okay,
you?
I have notes because
was I supposed to do one at a time?
my bad. I like it that way. I have my notes because my memory is the worst. So let's start with the matracas.
Okay.
So my matraca goes to director Sean Wang from the film Didi. So I recently watched this film.
Oh, I do want to see this. Is it good?
It was
check it out.
fantastic. You know, it was the most accurate representation, at least for me and my experience, although this film takes place in the Bay Area. It was the closest to my experience as somebody who was coming of age in the early 2000s. And so I've thought a lot about, you know, I'm very interested in film, and I've thought a lot about how one tells a coming of age story and the way that you create a mood. And I feel like Sean really, really landed this, and I felt emotionally connected. It was comedic, it was fantastic, and I left feeling a lot of empathy for young me. So matraca to Sean Wang for this amazing screenplay.
All right, and then what goes in la basura for you?
Okay, in la basura, so I actually, you and I might be on the same page here, because I've been looking at apartments recently, trying to figure out where to move, and I found this really great place, and I go there, and it's, you know, the price as advertised is not the price as advertised, and I feel like that's happening a lot, where you go someplace, they tell you what the price is, and then there are endless hidden fees. Just kidding, it's this much for this a month, or hey, we have a great pool, but you have to pay this much, or
to use the pool?
Parking is great, but you got to pay this much, and when you look at it at the end, it just makes everything further and further unaffordable. And I really don't understand how we're navigating housing in this city at this point.
Very hard, very difficult.
At this point.
What was the process like for you to find a place to live? Like, how was
Well,
that?
I was just very lucky because an old friend from college days lives here, and it was like her and her mom own a condo, and they sublease a room within it.
Oh, perfect.
And like I put on my Instagram story, hey, I want to sublease, because like my husband and I were living in Tucson for 6 years. He's eventually moving. I have this like weird 3-month gap where I needed to find a sublease because I needed to be on campus, and I was really weirded out and like worried about like living with random people. You know, they could be a serial killer. They could leave their dishes overnight in the sink.
Right, yeah.
There's just like such a spectrum of things.
I know, I don't know which I would prefer. A serial killer, as long as it's not me.
As long as they target other people.
It's not me.
So rent is cheap. I mean, like, well,
So it was like nice that I like moved in with someone I was familiar with. You know, like I know her like core person.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, I like that you're on this side of town, and hopefully you get to stay, but I know that commute is horrible.
I want to stay on this side, Brenda, but the commute's not going to be good for me.
You know, it's bad.
You know?
It's not good for most people.
Yeah.
What is your inspiración?
So my inspiración this week, actually, maybe you're familiar with this place. I went to the Chapel of the Chimes in Oakland for the first time.
Oh, cool.
And it is this mausoleum, this really gorgeous, incredible maze, like Gothic architecture. And Julia Morgan was a designer. And I went into this space, and it, you know, lately, for some reason, I think end of life stuff has really been on my mind, and so I went to this space and spent half of a day in there, really seeing the way people have honored the lives of the folks that came before us, and really understanding what it is to be an ancestor and what it is to inhabit the same history and the same spaces as me, because I'm from here and I'm from these places. And so the way that this place was given so much beauty and light, it just made me understand how much love went into it, and that connection between myself and those before me was so present. So I was so inspired after that. I thought a lot about my own death, or the death of people I love, and also about the beauty of celebrating their lives.
I love that. That sounds beautiful.
Yeah. I want to show it to you.
I would love to go. Yes, if you have pictures, you have to show me after this recording.
Okay. Brenda, vamos a ver, ¿y tú?
Okay, first, my matraca goes to our friends at mitú, who are having us here to record this episode. This is so wonderful, and we really appreciate it. So matraca goes to mitú. My basura, okay, I'm just gonna go for it. I'm in my 40s, and I have yet to find a menstrual product that I like. Like seriously, I mean, I don't know how many periods I have to go through before I find the one that I agree with you. I keep wanting to try the Diva cup or some sort of cup, but I need to just try it. I need to just try it. For some reason, I haven't done it. But anything I've used really it's lacking. It's leaking and not doing well. So that's my basura.
Also, there's lead in tampons.
Right, and I'm hearing all these horrible things. So what am I? I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So yeah, let's figure it out.
There's a lot of movement in this area, and maybe we can talk more about that in a different episode, because I actually know some Latinas leading the way in this.
Okay, let's hear it. Hear it. We definitely would like to hear from that. And then my inspiración, I really have been into books lately. I decided somebody recommended it. It's not normally the type of book I would pick up, but I decided to pick up the audiobook of Lessons in Chemistry. It was very good. I know there's like the show on Apple TV with Brie Larson. I think that's her name. And it was a really thrilling read. So just like a quick overview. It takes place in the 50s, and it's a woman that's a chemist, but she's just not taken seriously. And there's all kinds of challenges that go about that, but it's also at its core, it's a love story. And then it's also poetic justice at the end. So I think it's a great story. I really enjoyed it. So that's my inspiración is just that book and more books.
Oh, well, I'm in the market for something to read, so I'm going to go take a look.
It was really good. I really enjoyed the way it's like intertwined and connected. All right, so to end it though, I would love to know, how can people stay connected with you? Tell us more about Radio Cachimbona. What are you working on? What are the next episodes going to be about?
So Radio Cachimbona is going to continue. I started it with an Arizona borderlands focus, but now that I'm in LA, I'm going to continue the border and immigration focus when I'm going to interview more LA-based guests. I'd love to have you all on the podcast.
Oh, yes, we'd love to.
And I just interviewed Pablo Alvarado, who's the executive director of Endelon. We talked about how he started Endelon. He's a really important figure in the Salvadoran American community here in LA. So yeah, I'm excited to interview more folks who are in the immigrants' rights space, but doing their work here in LA. Perfect. And you can follow Radio Cachimbona at Radio Cachimbona on Instagram, X, and Facebook. And it's also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
This is so wonderful.
Thank you. Tamarindo Podcast is Brenda Gonzalez and Delsy Sandoval. We are also the show's executive producers. Jeff Ricards wrote our theme song. Sonoro Media's Karina Riveroll provides production support, and Yvette Borjas edits our episodes for YouTube. The best way to support our work is to rate and review Tamarindo or share an episode with a friend. Get in touch with us at tamarindopodcast.com.